Today I wanted to show you how to go from this to, well, this. Or like two of these, but I need the skein to make the second slipper, so just pretend this is a pair of slippers. And my goal with this video is to kind of show you the basic method and the construction. I'm not going to give you a specific pattern or gauge to follow. You can basically use any yarn that you have, any needles, and you can make it for any size that you want. I'm just going to give you the basic recipe, which you can customize to your own liking. If you're a beginner, you can still do this. Maybe it shouldn't be your first project, but you basically need to know how to knit in the round and how to do a knit stitch. It's not that complicated. If you knit socks before, you'll be fine. Also, a few words about the yarn suggestions. You can use almost any yarn that you want. I've made these slippers in a rough, kind of rustic wool, and it worked great. These ones I'm showing you right now are using Cascade 220. And I've also made myself a pair of slippers like that in boucle yarn, which also works great. The only yarn I wouldn't recommend for this is the yarn that really loses its shape after blocking. Mostly I'm referring to superwash merino. You can use sock yarn, which has superwash merino, like usual superwash sock blends, but just make sure you do a gauge swatch so you know exactly how much it grows after blocking, because a lot of my tutorial points are specifically related to knitting until you reach a certain point on your foot. But if you do that with the yarn that grows a lot, you will just end up with like a really misshapen slipper. So first, let me tell you about the basic construction. This slipper is double layered. It's knit kind of toe up. Let me take it off the shoe tree. And you knit both layers at the same time. You start, one sec. You start right here at the toe on each side and increase until it's wide enough to fit your foot. And then you add the length. And then you join the two sides together to actually make the heel. And at the end, you finish by joining what you've knit on the round with a Kitchener stitch. The most fiddly part is right here when you just started, because you need to increase on the DPNs. But then it gets pretty simple from there. So let's go step by step. So before we begin, please take a moment to look through all of the tools and materials I've listed on the screen. It's not that many, but just make sure that you have everything that you need before you start knitting. And for context, I'm using Cascade 220 yarn, which is a worsted weight yarn, and I'm holding a double, and I'm using 5mm needles. And for my beginner friends, I try to list all of the knitting techniques I use in this, everything I could kind of think of that is used in the tutorial. And if you don't know some of those techniques, you can watch a separate tutorial on them specifically. I've also listed some in the description below. And with that, I think that's everything. So we're going to start by casting on 12 stitches plus one extra stitch to close the work in a round. And we're going to use a long tail cast on method on our double pointed needles. And I'm not going to use a slip knot for this. Instead, I will hold my yarn as if I'm doing a slip knot. I will place my needle right here, hold it with my finger, and then just cast on one more stitch. And now I have 2 stitches on this needle. And I find that this way it doesn't have the knot right here, and it's a lot less bulky. So I usually use this method if I'm knitting in the round. And I need one more stitch on this needle. And then on our second needle, I'm also going to cast on 3 stitches. Our third needle, same thing, 3 stitches. And then on our fourth needle, I'm actually going to cast on 4 stitches. So make sure that your needles and stitches are untwisted and everything is kind of facing the right way. And now to close this to start knitting in the round, we need to take this first stitch, the first stitch we cast on with our right needle, and place it on our right needle, and then we will take the stitch that we cast on last and pull it through on our left needle carefully, and then we're actually going to drop it in between the needles and gonna pull it from the back, and then we will place this fourth stitch from the right needle on our left needle like so. And now we have 3 stitches on each needle and we are ready to start knitting. The first round is actually really fiddly. It'll get a lot better from here, trust me. We just need to figure out that first round. So we will start it by knitting 1 stitch, and then we need to increase. So we will knit 2 stitches in this same stitch. So first we're gonna just knit 1 without slipping the stitch to the right needle, and then we will knit it again through the back loop, and now we can release it. And then the third stitch on this needle we just knit as usual, and we repeat this process until the end of the round. You knit 1 and this stitch stays in the left needle, and then you insert your needle through the back loop and you knit this stitch again, release it, and now you have 2 stitches, so 1 stitch was increased. So our first round was knit 1, knit 2 in the same stitch, knit 1, and then repeat until the end of the round. And now we have 16 stitches in total, or 4 on each double pointed needle. And our second round is just knit until the end of the round. So continue and we'll meet here in a moment. So now that we're done with our second round, we will continue knitting at the same time, increasing 4 stitches every other round. So we're going to do increases right here and here, and this will create this shape at the toe. And as you can see, I've placed 4 markers on the spots where we will do our increases, and I'd advise you to use a contrasting marker here right near the beginning of the round, so this marker can kind of double as your beginning of the round marker. It'll be less bulky, especially at the beginning. We're gonna start our third round by knitting 1 stitch, then slipping our marker, and before we continue knitting, we will make 1 stitch from this ladder or bridge right here, and it's going to be a left leaning increase. So like this. If you didn't understand any of that, that's fine. It's probably because I'm explaining it wrong or you can't really see it. So I'm going to include a few tutorials that explain it a lot better than me. So we continue knitting on this needle and then on our second needle until we reach our second marker. And before we slip this marker, we will do a left leaning increase, like so. Then we're going to slip our marker and knit 1 more stitch. And then again, we will knit until we reach our marker, slip our marker here, and do a right leaning increase. It's a little bit fiddly at the beginning, so I apologize. And then we continue knitting. And just as we did already, we knit until we reach our marker. Without slipping the marker, we do a left leaning increase, slip our marker, and knit one. So this is our increase row. Now we have 5 stitches on each needle. And our next round will be just knit until you reach the end of the round. So now that we're done with this round, we will continue knitting by switching between these 2 rounds that we just did. So the one where we increase here, and then a round where we just knit all stitches. And we're gonna do that until this part, this toe, is wide enough to fit our foot plus maybe 1 centimeter of ease. And our last row will be the row where we do the increases. So once you are done with the amount of increase rounds that you need, your toe should look like this. And from that point on, you just continue knitting in stockinette until the work, when you try it on, reaches around here on your foot. And if you're using a yarn that tends to stretch after blocking, then you start about 1 centimeter before that. And as you can see, I've already done that for our second layer, so you repeat that for both of your layers, and then we'll meet once we're ready to join the 2 sides together. So now that we are done knitting the foot on both of our layers, we will need to join the 2 sides together to continue knitting in the round, and we will continue by knitting this part. But before we do that, we need to rearrange our stitches on our needles a little bit, and to demonstrate which sides we'll need to work on, I will place some markers. So this is our beginning of the round marker, and on this needle where we had our beginning of the round, we need to separate 3 stitches on the right edge, and then on our second needle we need to separate 3 stitches on the left edge. And these 6 stitches, it could actually be 8 if you have a thinner yarn, or it can even be 10 if you're using sock yarn. In my case, with worsted weight held double, it's 6 stitches, and I find that it's the most kind of common width. We will take these 6 stitches and we will actually put them on a spare needle, and we'll do the same thing with this side, and we will sew them together with a Kitchener stitch. And this part will be the front of our slipper. So let me just put these stitches on a spare needle so we can close them with Kitchener. You can actually put them on a spare needle and let them rest while you continue knitting in the round, but I find that it gets in the way, so I prefer to actually sew them together or graft them together before I continue knitting. So now that we've separated these stitches on a different double pointed needle, we will need to actually join the remaining stitches on a pair of circular needles. So once we're done grafting these stitches, we will continue knitting in the round. Let me show you how your remaining stitches should look. If you're the same as me and you're not familiar or a fan of magic loop, then I would advise you to use short cord on your circular needles, or you can use any length of the cord that you want if you do want to use magic loop. So starting from the left side of our separated stitches, we will begin transferring our remaining stitches to a circular needle, first from this DPN and then continue transferring from our next needle. And then you place a marker right here before you proceed to your last DPN before the beginning of the round marker. So this will be the middle of one of your sides for this part of the slipper. And you continue transferring your stitches. And if by this point you haven't cut your yarn, you can go ahead and cut your yarn. And then you just transfer the rest. If you have a beginning of the round marker, you can just remove it. And now we are done transferring the remaining stitches on a circular needle for this side, and we will need to do the same thing with our other side. So we'll start by transferring the stitches starting from the left side after the separated stitches. And again, after you've transferred the stitches from the second DPN on this side, place a marker before continuing and proceed with transferring your stitches. And the only stitches remaining on the double pointed needles should be the one that we separated. And then, just so it's easier to begin your round once we're done grafting these stitches, just take your right circular needle and just continue transferring your stitches from the first side of the slipper to your right needle until you reach that marker that we placed. So, and it's gonna be the beginning of the round marker for you from that point on, so you can just attach it to the ladder or the bridge so you don't lose it. And that's it. Our stitches are set up, and now we'll need to close these stitches with a Kitchener stitch. And first we need to actually turn them inside out. So now we are ready to graft our stitches together, and to do that we need some scrap yarn and a tapestry needle. And first, because our yarn is not attached to these stitches, we will need to pull it through this stitch at the back from left to right. Pull it through and leave quite a long tail here because we will need it later to close off this gap right here. And to set up our Kitchener stitch, we need to pull our yarn through this first stitch from right to left, and then from this stitch from left to right. Tighten it a little bit, and now we are ready to start. So we need to pull our tapestry needle through this stitch again from left to right this time, and then we can drop it off the needle, and then through this stitch from right to left. Then we'll go to our stitches at the back and insert our tapestry needle from right to left into this stitch and drop it off the needle, and then through this stitch from left to right and leave it on the needle. And we continue these steps until we are done with our stitches, until there are no more stitches left. So from left to right, drop it off. From right to left, leave it on. Tighten your stitches here a bit. From right to left, drop it. From left to right, leave it on the needles. I'm going to link a tutorial for how to do a Kitchener stitch, which probably explains it a million times better than me, in case you've never done a Kitchener stitch before and you need a better example. So this needle is done. We are done, and if you feel like your stitches are too tight, like mine are here, you can use either your tapestry needle or your regular needle to kind of neaten it up. a little bit. Now we are done. And we also don't need this scrap yarn here anymore. We can pull it back, so then it's going to be easy to close this gap right here. And we'll have the same kind of gap on this end as well, but we'll take care of it later. For now, we're done with our grafting, and we can move on to just continue knitting our slipper in the round. So to continue knitting, we need to start from one of those markers that we placed before that indicate the half of our work. We will carry those markers to the very end so we know where to divide the work to actually close this part with Kitchener. And let me just take my yarn here. We just start knitting in stockinette until we reach this gap right here. And now that we've reached this point, before we continue, we need to find this ladder right here in between the stitches and make a stitch and knit it. And then we will need to place a marker and do the same for this bridge right here. So we make a stitch. Doesn't matter if it's right leaning or left leaning. Tighten it together and then continue knitting until we reach the gap on this side. And we will do the same thing for this side. So we find this ladder between the stitches and we make one stitch. We place a marker and then do another stitch here. And then we just continue knitting until the end of the round. And once we've reached this point, we will knit one more round across all stitches. And once we're done with this row, we slip our marker and continue knitting until 4 stitches before the first marker that we placed in the center. So we knit until this point, and then we need to do a right leaning decrease. Then knit 2 stitches, slip our next marker, knit 2 more stitches, and then do a left leaning decrease or SSK. And then we continue until 4 stitches before the next marker. And I'm not talking about this marker, which is on this side, the next marker here at the center. So again, until this point, and we will do a right leaning decrease again. Then knit 2 stitches, slip our marker, knit 2 more stitches, and then do a left leaning decrease. Now we just continue until the end of the round. And these decreases will create this shape right here. So once you're done with your first decrease row, you need to knit 3 more rows, do another decrease row, then knit 3 more rows, and then the last decrease row. And once you are done, I'll tell you what to do next. So once you are done with your 3rd decrease row, you can go ahead and try on the slipper. So you tuck one side inside the other, doesn't matter which side, and you can try it on to see how much more rounds you need to continue knitting. And you actually need to continue with a few rounds until you reach about this point on your heel. And once you are done, we will do a few more rows of very minor shaping. So in my case, I needed to add 7 more rounds, and now I'm ready to start doing a few decreases right here on these sides, because it will make our slipper less pointy at the heel You can go without this shaping if you want, but I prefer to do it because it'll give it a much smoother shape. So we will need to knit 2 stitches after our beginning of the round marker. And then we need to do a right leaning decrease. You can also, if you didn't do that already, ditch your markers that we use for these decreases right here. We don't need them anymore. And after you've done this decrease, you need to continue knitting until you reach this point where there are 4 stitches before the next marker, and you need to do a left leaning decrease here. Now you knit the 2 stitches, you slip the marker, you need to knit 2 more stitches, and then again you do the right leaning decrease. And on the other side, it's the same thing. So you knit across here until you reach this point where there are 4 stitches before this marker, which is our beginning of the round marker, and you do a left leaning decrease here. So once we've reached this point, we need to do 3 more rounds of just knit stitches and then another decrease round. And if the yarn you are using tends to stretch, and for example, you did a gauge swatch and you see that it tends to grow a lot after blocking, the last decrease round will actually be your last round of your slipper, and after that you can proceed to closing it with Kitchener. But before you do that, make sure that you weave in all of the ends, because once we close this part right here, we will not be able to reach all of the ends that we have inside on the purl side. And if your yarn is not that stretchy, then you can go ahead and do a few more rounds of just knit stitches after that before you proceed to closing your work with Kitchener. Now that we're done with our decreases and we weaved in all of the ends and closed up these openings right here, we have only one step left, which is to join the 2 sides of our work with a Kitchener stitch, just like we did with this opening here. And before you proceed with the Kitchener, you need to make sure that you have an equal amount of stitches on both sides between the markers. And then you can go ahead and graft these stitches. So now I'm happy to say that we are done with our slipper. In my case, it's the second slipper. In your case, it's probably the first one. And the last thing we need to do here is to just hide our end, which we used to graft the stitches together, and you can go ahead and cut it. For the finishing touches, you can actually add an insole to the slipper, and you can insert an elastic into this part right here so it cinches up a little bit. And also, if you feel like it, you can add an outer sole here. Please block the slippers once you're done with them. If you have a thing like a shoe tree or a sock blocker, it'll work perfectly. And I really hope that this tutorial was comprehensive. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can comment under this video or message me on Instagram. Please, if you like this video, consider liking it and subscribing. I do knitting podcasts, and I wish you a really lovely day and happy knitting. If you want to use novelty yarns or the yarns that are really kind of fluffy and dark like this one, make sure you use a lot of markers and progress keepers so you don't get lost in the construction process. Or, to be honest, maybe skip this yarn for this project, maybe use something else.